crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on and I just happened to glance and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something looks like a man. I don't know what it was. Just it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was. Whatever it is, it's running. I couldn't catch it if I was going to chase it. So whatever it was, it was standing out there. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better. Yeah.
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on out there?
That son of a bitch is about 6 foot 9, I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Okay, hang on.
He's right.
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what, he's a big, real big person, that's all I can say.
Okay, but it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person or somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see what it, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
From the remote jungles of Clinton Falls, Indiana, this is Larry Battson on a magnificent Saturday, and the Bartholomew County Library is our sponsor for today's special Bigfoot broadcast. Hello, Columbus, Indiana. I'll tell you, if you've never been to Columbus, go check it out because it's the architectural capital of North America. They have more unusual, beautiful buildings in Columbus than anywhere, and the library is magnificent. And we would be there today. But of course we know why we're not. So they were so kind to do this, and I was allowed to do it from our home. And we're going to talk Bigfoot. If you have any questions, anything you'd like to say, please send it to us. We want to know where you're watching from, not only in Bartholomew County, but all around Indiana and around the world. So it's a magnificent day. Let's say hello to a few of our viewers today. Hello, Carrie. Nice to see you. Lee from Kentucky joins us. Craig Conyer. Hi, boss. Well, hi, Craig. He's probably sitting out by a swimming pool today. But we're talking Bigfoot today. And I am a wildlife educator. I have for the last... And hi from Bartholomew County, Mary Claire Speckner, who is the one to put this all together. God bless you. Thank you very, very much. Hello, April. And we're going to talk for a while. We're in no big hurry. That's absolutely correct. And as always, joined by the Yeti, North America's greatest drinking device. And today we be drinking Crystal Light Special Tea. And you know, we have a special guest today. Very, very special guest. And here, let's, we're talking Bigfoot, you know. Talking, here, come over here. Hey, monkey, come over here and see me. Yeah, there you go. Look at all, look, there's Columbus and all around watching us today. Here, would you like a drink? Here. Yeah, I know. Here, you can drink out of the straw. I don't care. Oh, I think I need some help. Well, we are talking Bigfoot, and who else would know more about talking Bigfoot than yours truly and my good friend Elizabeth? Because, you know, I've heard people saying that they've spotted big monkeys in the woods. Well, this is the biggest monkey I know. Yeah. But I have been a wildlife educator now going on 41 years, had the opportunity to travel across the country, doing wildlife lectures in schools and libraries, of course, yes, libraries, nature centers, had animals on national television such as Oprah, Tonight Show, Today's Show, on and on and on. But we've always felt the most important work that we do is visiting schools. Well, one of our big advocates was Jim Fowler from the old television program Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. You remember those days. Jim and Marlon, they'd be, well, Jim would be wrestling the alligator while Marlon was up in the hut with the local tribe women having a few cocktails. That's what they would be having. But anyway, so Jim was always asked to bring animals whenever he was going to speak. You know, whenever he was going to speak, and you see, he had no. She could stay. He had no animals. But he knew guys that had animals that would be willing to travel tens of thousands of miles and meet up with him to do these programs that he had arranged. So one of those particular programs occurred in Columbus, Georgia, at a place called Callaway Gardens. What a magnificent garden it was. My goodness. And we were having breakfast, and Jim had just gotten back from doing a television program for ABC called Spirit of Adventure, and they had gone to Russia to film the Russian brown bear. Well, as Jim proceeds to tell me, he says all the Russians wanted to talk about was Bigfoot, because they'd seen something in those mountains that was very similar to the Yeti that's been described in that part of the world, in Europe, of course, the Himalayas. Hi, Kathy. Hi, Patty. Terry, nice to have you with us. Katie, Lee, getting everybody. Terry, yeah. And Shannon. And yeah, all that. But anyway, where was I going with this? I forget. And so it'll come to me here. So we're sitting there talking about this, and I'd been interested in the Bigfoot subject for so many, many, many years. So many years I've been interested in it. And there I'm sitting across the table from Mr. Animal Guy himself, Jim Fowler, and he talks about Russians interested in the Yeti because they'd seen something in those mountains. So it all rekindled, it all came back. And I still had many of the books that I'd had as a youngster, like the one from Peter Byrne, I think it was called Finding Bigfoot. What a tremendous book. And I was really gravitated to the subject. And in 1969, or 7, excuse me, when we saw the Patterson-Gimlin film that had been shot in Bluff Creek, California, and we had a chance to open up that Argosy magazine and look at these unbelievable photographs from the film of the animal, and also pictures of Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin holding these giant foot casts that they had made on that sandbar. So I was getting all fueled. I mean, I was interested in Bigfoot again. It's Jim Fowler's fault, Cheryl, that's my wife, because sometimes he says I get a little bit too wrapped up in it. But it's Jim Fowler's fault. Well, I go home. We from Georgia. I go home and I get a phone call from a friend who's a producer of outdoor shows, like your sports shows and so forth. And he says, Larry, he says, I want to do something very, very special for our sports show in Cleveland this year. Do you have any ideas? Well, I was fresh off of the Fowler job in Georgia, and I said, yeah, I do. I said, I just had breakfast with Jim Fowler, and he was talking about Yetis and Bigfoot and Sasquatches and how the Russian people over there were very interested in the subject, more than we were. And he said, that's a fantastic idea. He said, I've always had an interest in it. I said, let's do a big exhibit. And that's what we did. In fact, I built an 8-foot Bigfoot out of paper mache and dock foam. 8 foot tall. Oh my gosh, I was possessed. I'd used the scraper on that dock foam so much, I've actually burnt a hole in the lipper going, So we got the thing built. But here was the coup de grace. Hell, here was the deal. He said, let's get somebody from the northwestern part of this country that knows about Bigfoot. Let's bring him to Cleveland and talk about it. So I said, okay. So I get on the phone. I call a place in Willow Creek, California, which happens to be Bigfoot capital of the world. If you go there, you get your Bigfoot hot dog, your Bigfoot hamburger. They got the Bigfoot motel. It's full of big feet. Yeah. So anyway, I call the variety store. I told him, I said, hey, Al. He says, I'm building this display for this outdoor show in Cleveland. And I said, I think the display should have some souvenirs from Bigfoot country, Willow Creek. He says, I couldn't agree more. He says, we need to get the Chamber of Commerce in on it too. And he says, they can send you some stuff, and I'll send you some stuff. And it arrived. But then I asked him, I said, hey, you know anybody's ever seen a Bigfoot? And he said, well, yeah. He said, there was a couple guys through here a year or two ago. He said, let me go get their numbers. And he came back, and he had these 2 phone numbers. One of them happened to be John Green. Now, I was naive. I didn't know who John Green was, but I would be educated very, very quickly that day when I discovered he was the godfather of Bigfoot. The godfather of it. So That's his book, The Apes Among Us, Sasquatch. So he was the godfather of Bigfoot. And I'm talking to him on the phone, and he's living in Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia. And before the conversation was over with, I had convinced the infamous John Green, the most respected man in this subject, to come to Cleveland and speak for 3 days. He agreed to do so, but he said, you know, there's two things we need. First of all, you need to call that other number you have, which would be a fellow named Bob Titmus, and you need to get the Roger Patterson film with Bob Patterson Gimlin film. And so I located that. I ended up getting it from his wife, Patricia Patterson. And I talked to Bob Titmus, and I'll tell you what, that completely changed my life, that conversation. That conversation with Bob Titmus, which probably lasted, about $83 in long distance charges. But he told me about his sightings of Bigfoot. And after I hung up that phone, I looked around my office and I said, my gosh, it's all changed, because I was going to have some fun with this. I had not envisioned doing anything really too serious, because scientists had said that these things didn't exist, but there are people watching right now to this broadcast, and they're saying to themselves, the scientists don't know what they're talking about, because I know what I saw. I am convinced what I saw was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot. So we go to Cleveland. John Green flies in with his beautiful wife, June. And we do shows together. We talk together, talk a lot. In fact, he actually gave me cassette tapes from his collection. Interviews with Roger Patterson. Interviews Roger Patterson had done. Sounds of the Sasquatch, which I'd never heard before. And we're going to play here in a little bit. And I go back to my room after that long day and night, because it was a lot of work. You know, it's tiring to be nice all day. It's tiring to be pleasant. You know, and anybody that works in sales will tell you that, or a library can tell you that too. So here we go. And I get a phone call in my room that night. And I'm just laying on the bed. I'm going, oh my gosh, when's tomorrow start? And the phone rings. I pick it up. And this very nice gentleman's on the phone. He said, I heard about you being on television this morning with John Green. He said, I want to talk to you about Bigfoot. And I told him, I said, well, I was really kind of getting ready to go to bed. And he says, why don't you just come to the Sandy Bell knows what she saw. Absolutely, Sandy. And in fact, write a description, and I will tell everyone if you don't mind. And so he says to me simply, he wasn't willing to come to Cleveland, because it was a good drive. It was 100 miles. But he said, I'm at war with these things. I took a step back and I go, what is he talking about? What do you mean? So he proceeded to tell me his story. His story of building a home in Conneaut, Ohio, right outside the outskirts of Conneaut, Ohio. And he chose this spot because it was right on the Pennsylvania line with Ohio. And it was a sportsman capital because he liked to hunt. He liked to fish. It was all there. And it was wild. I mean, it was wild Ohio. So it took them a while to get moved in, because here's what kept happening. They'd build so much on the structure of the house, and something would proceed to take a few of those boards out. So finally they put a guard on it so they could get the house built, and they got moved in. But they get moved in, and I know everyone that's had experiences with Sasquatches, especially around your home, can relate to this, because they started finding things. They find things like, well, these footprints, these 16, 17, 18-inch footprints they'd find in the mud. And that made no sense to him. He'd look at his apple tree one morning, and he thought, where did all them apples go? That thing was full yesterday. There's not even any laying on the ground. What the heck? And then he'd find a deer, a fawn, Just a baby. Torn in half. Then one morning the front half of the fawn would be laying in the yard. The next morning the back half of the fawn would be laying in the yard. Oh, it's time. But the night he was in bed with his wife at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and something walked up to his window and started screaming so loud, so very loud, that the windows literally rattled. They vibrated. Now, luckily, I don't know if luckily is the right word, but he had a pistol in the nightstand next to the bed, and he grabbed that pistol because he thought, I don't know what in the world's going on out here, but we're going to find out. Well, his wife heard it, of course, and she's just sitting straight up in bed thinking, what the heck is happening? Why did we move here? Oh, my gosh. So my friend goes out, and he can still hear the screaming, and he can hear something trouncing around in the woods. So he takes that gun. He aims at where the sounds come. Boom! Quiet. Nothing. No more sounds. But he could still hear her walking. He heard her walk back along his property line and walked right into what they call jumbo woods. Jumbo woods. So he goes back in the house and he tells, well, dear, I don't know. I would say it's probably a bobcat. Something along that line. Well, she believes him. But he doesn't even believe himself. He knows that wasn't a bobcat. No way. So the next day, next time, same place. Got that messed up. Same time, next you know what I mean. And happens again. Thing comes up to the window, starts screaming. Goes outside with his pistol again. Aims it in the dark. Boom, shoots it. Gets quiet. You still hear it walking around. So he calls up the game warden. Game warden comes out and he tells him, he says, I don't know what we're dealing with here, but I'm telling you one thing. When it walks through the woods, it sounds like to me it's two-legged. It's not four-legged. It doesn't sound, it makes too much noise to be a bear. Bears can be very quiet. This thing was making too much noise. And he says it was breaking limbs. So the game warden said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do here for you, sir. I'll tell you exactly what we're going to do. We're going to bring you out a bear trap. We're going to bring you out a bear trap, put in your front yard. We'll take care of this nuisance animal. We'll get taken care of for you. So they bring out the bear trap. My friend looks at that bear trap. He's thinking to himself, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think it's going to work at all. So it sits out there for 2-3 nights. Nothing happens. Nothing comes around the house. No noises. But they don't catch anything. Then he's sitting on his porch. One night late, he's sitting on his porch. And I know that's happened to you before. When in the darkness, he can see something moving around. He can tell there's something there, something moving around. Now, he had one security light in his yard. It was clear toward the back. And this thing walked underneath that security light. And that light, that beam of light cascaded over its head, its shoulders. And he could see how big it was. And he's just sitting there and, my God, look at the size of that, he's thinking. Oh, my Lord. And this thing just starts rocking back and forth. He's watching it. It's almost like he's hypnotized. Then he watched it take a step back and you couldn't see it anymore. And you can hear it very peacefully walk into the woods. He's basically saying, I think, to my friend, now you know what you're dealing with. Now you know who I am. I am the one that walked up to your window and screamed in your window 2 nights in a row. I am one among others that also stole the apples from your tree in the ground. I'm the one that brought the fawn that had been killed and torn in two and left it in your backyard for you. Gift. I am the one. Now, my friend, he was not good. He was so concerned for his family after he saw this thing. This thing really never gave him any reason to be concerned. Never did anything violent. But he was totally concerned. So what he did is he made a great big mistake. He called the television stations. He called the newspapers. And they ran their stories. And the neighbors hated him, bringing all this attention to Conneaut. All these people that lived out in the wilderness area in their homes that they had built, and the acreage they had joining their home and their property. And now here was TV people. And he also said, Larry, he said, Fish and Wildlife officers would spy on me. They'd park down the street and watch me very, very carefully. One of his neighbors came over one day. He said, I want to show you something. And his neighbor, they went back in the woods and said, shh, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Don't want them to hear us. So they walked up over this hill. And down below, he saw a man with these huge German Shepherd-like dogs. They were bigger than a German Shepherd, but they looked like a German Shepherd, but they were just larger. And they were in this fenced-in area with this fence that was about 10 feet tall that was basically hanging from the trees to form this circle, and he would be in there working with these dogs, but with no vocal commands. It was all hand signals. Who was this man? What was his job? What was he doing? Someone saw a car, a large black car, drop off a box of what looked like provisions, supplies, and this man walked out of the woods and grabbed it and went back into the woods with it. They really stepped up on the surveillance of my friend when he called and asked about this. When he called local, I'll get it out, local law enforcement, and asked, what is this man doing back in the woods? They said basically it was none of his business. Just forget what you've seen, tell no one. He said, Larry, what gives with this Bigfoot legend? I've had so many reports. Just weeks ago, I have a new friend. His name's Austin Lee, and he lived down not too far from Columbus in a way. He lived in Bloomington, right outside of Bloomington. And he was a deer hunter. And he was in his deer stand one day, and he was watching this doe. He didn't want a doe. He wanted a buck. But he was watching this doe. When all of a sudden, so fast, so quick, this thing that was on two legs, that was taller than most people you know, larger than anyone you've ever met, basically come out of that woods, and it punched that deer right in the rib cage and knocked it to the ground. And as soon as it fell to the ground, this thing, this creature, grabbed it by its legs, beat it up against a tree and killed it. Then just like nothing. He grabbed that body of that deer, which you know had to weigh at least a minimum 120 pounds, at the minimum. Grabbed it, tucked it underneath his arm, and walked off with it. I've had so many deer hunters over the years that have told me very similar stories where they killed the deer. As they're walking up on it to tag it, take it out of the woods, they're met by something else. Huge creature, covered with long black hair or fur. Pick up the deer that they had just killed and walk off with it. And give them a look like, it's not yours anymore, man. It's not yours. I'm taking it. I am taking it. One woman, I like the way that she put it. During the day, the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot, share the forest. They share it with whomever, with us. But at night, they own the forest. When I went to speak to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about Bigfoot, and that's the first time they've ever hosted anything on that subject at the National Conservation Training Center in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And I spoke to a room of scientists, naturalists, Secret Service agents, law enforcement, people dealing with wildlife, people dealing with law enforcement. A huge room, huge auditorium. It was named after the late Senator Robert Beard. And I spoke to these people expecting so much sarcasm, but I didn't see that. I didn't get that. I looked at these people and they all looked me right in the eye like they knew exactly what I was talking about. That broadcast went out to 1,200 outlets across North America. And I received so many emails from conservationists, naturalists, guys that worked on the trails and the national parks, kept them up to date. And they said, thank you so much. Because we were always afraid to talk about the Bigfoot subject. We were always afraid to tell people what we had seen. But there was one man who wasn't. His name was Yellowstone Ranger Bob Jackson. He patrolled the most remote area in North America. It's called the Thoroughfare District in Yellowstone National Park. He patrolled this area for poachers for over 30 years. Bob Jackson, Action Jackson, was so good and was so intense on this job he felt he needed to do that he arrested more illegal activities in Yellowstone National Park with these poachers than all of the rangers combined. He was highly respected. But there was one thing that he did which ended his career. When Dick Cheney went hunting there and he broke the rules, Bob Jackson did not want to make it easy on him. He says he is no better. He is no better than anyone else. And because he wouldn't lighten up, because he wanted to follow those rules to the T, he was pressured. He was pressured to retire. And he did retire. But he also received an apology letter from our United States government. This guy was so credible, so very credible. I mean, his testimony had put people in prison. It cost him tens of thousands of dollars. It cost them property. But oh, Action Jackson, when he was on patrol that one day in Yellowstone National Park, and he looked down this valley, this willow grove, and he could see one white-tailed deer, a doe, just standing there. And when he saw that deer, almost at the same moment, his horses started acting up. And he knew what that usually meant. If their eyes get big, if their nostrils would flare, it meant there was a grizzly bear in the vicinity. But if there was a grizzly bear in the vicinity, in the area, around him somewhere close, why wasn't that deer reacting to it? The horses were going crazy. He almost had to let go of the reins on the one that was carrying all these supplies. Just about the time he was getting ready to do that, that doe, that white-tailed deer, she bolted. And as soon as she took off out of that willow grove, as Bob would describe it, was an animal, a creature that walked on two legs, bipedal. And he watched it stalk that deer from willow grove to willow grove. And his thought in the back of his head was, they are real. It is true. We do share this planet with something like this. Some kind of maybe prehistoric man. We don't know. But I'll tell you one thing it's not. It's not an ape. Because if it was an ape, we'd already have one in a zoo somewhere. This is not an ape. This is highly intelligent. I'm not saying apes are not highly intelligent, but these are so smart. And they are so attuned to their senses. When you walk in that woods and they're standing there, you cannot see them because they're so well camouflaged, as well as the 3, 4, 5, or 6 other ones that are watching you at the same time. They can tell by your actions that what you're going to do. Are you a hunter? We don't like you. You will not see us. We will hide. I can remember the late William Drain Guinness when he saw one in Virginia. Two, with a couple friends that were in the FBI. And they were just hiking or walking up this trail on this property in Virginia. And one of the FBI agents said, hold on, we're not alone. There's somebody around here. Somebody around here. And about that time, my friend Bill said he saw this thing run up the hill. He said the muscles were so intense. This animal was so unbelievable that as quick as it moved, he knew one thing. If it wanted us, it could have us anytime, any place. This animal was absolutely amazing. And he watched it for a few moments. Then the 2 FBI guys said, we're getting out of here. We're getting out of here. They were scared to death. They were scared to death. And when my friend asked to go back to that property that the one FBI agent owned, he said, nobody's going in there. Nobody. And we'll forget about what we saw that day. I don't want a bunch of people on my property. We'll just forget about it. Leave it all alone. Forget what you've seen. It's just like the trucker that was following another trucker in Ohio. And he saw something run across the road in front of that truck, and the truck hit it and knocked it to the side of the pavement. He stopped his truck and got out. I think it happened so fast, the truck that actually hit whatever it was had no idea that he'd done it. But the trucker that was following, he walked back and he looked at this thing and he says, all I can say, Larry, it was a human covered with long, long fur. Well, they called their superiors within moments. That highway in Ohio was closed going both directions. And the carcass, the animal that had been hit, had been loaded up and taken away. And all the law enforcement officers on the scene were told, forget about this. Don't tell anyone what you've seen. If you want to retire to be being a law enforcement officer, you'll forget this evening. You will forget it. It was just like Mount St. Helens. An incredible explosion. There have been so many Bigfoot sightings in the area. And so many animals had been killed during that eruption. And they were so afraid that those decaying animals, those dying animals, or animals, of course, that have already died, that as they would rot, they would pollute all the waterways. So they had to get them out of there. They'd have these huge nets filled with elk and deer and bear. And one man says, I can still remember it like it was yesterday when I saw one of those helicopters fly by and I looked up at the net right below it and I could see 2 arms, 2 human-like arms sticking out of that netting. Of course, that wasn't too far from what we know as 8 Canyon. story of Fred Beck and how they shot one and it fallen into the canyon that would later be renamed Ape Canyon. And that night, the rocks and limbs and so forth that thundered on that cabin kept them up all night. These were mountain men. These were tough guys. Tough guys. And the next morning, as soon as it was light, they were out of there, never to go back. But there's one little detail that proves how credible this story is. Because they left all their equipment. They left it all. If they had lied and this had not really happened, would they have left their equipment? It's like when we talk about, for those interested in the Bigfoot Sasquatch legend, so many of you are, and we all know about the Patterson-Gimlin film. And it seems like every 10 years somebody comes up with this crazy story about how several have been killed that day. And that is so wrong. Because I talked to Bob Gilman, I talked to John Green, who spent most of his life pursuing the Bigfoot. Never saw one. Never saw one. They'd find tracks in California, and John Green would not think twice about loading up in a plane and flying hundreds of miles just to look at these tracks. And Bob Gimlin, I said, and John Green told me, he said, I would have been an idiot not to go back and brought back a body. Because can you imagine what that would be worth? An actual body of the Sasquatch or Bigfoot, it'd be worth millions. Millions of dollars. And that film, when you look at that film, it is so incredible. So very incredible. I had promised earlier that one of the tapes John Green sent me was these sounds. And I can remember playing these sounds in this very library here in Columbus. This beautiful library. And there was a man sitting to my left, about 3 rows back. And that's usually a pretty good indication that if you see somebody not sitting in the front, but kind of sitting in the back, and they've got that look in their face like, I understand everything he's talking about. You know they've had something occur. Well, that's where he was sitting, about a third of the way back. You know, and I'd watch him. He'd get all antsy. He'd sit there and get antsy as I'd tell these different stories and reports I'd had accumulated over the years. Then I played these sounds. And when I played these very sounds from Washington, I turned off the little CD player. He stood straight up. He says, my God, that is the same sounds that I've heard around my cabin. I've got to get my wife. So he leaves. He's hysterical. I'm going to play these sounds because I like to play them because sometimes someone has a story. And they'll tell me exactly, or they've heard these sounds before. So these are from Washington. Now keep in mind, they're not on the best quality equipment. But listen carefully, and I think you'll hear what we're talking about. those sounds. Every time I listen to them, they still give me the chills. They still, as most people would describe the feeling when they've seen a Sasquatch or heard the Sasquatch, is the hairs in the back of your neck feel like they're just standing up. And I don't get that same feeling every time I listen to that recording. And how that sheriff out there heard those sounds. And he walked back into the forest and basically. Did I say basically enough? He walked into 2 8-foot tall creatures. 2 of them. It's always, to me, the most fascinating people to talk to are not the people that are pursuing this, but the people that accidentally bump into it. Like the fellow that got back from Vietnam. He had done 2 tours, and he had seen horrible things. And he thought, when I go home to Indiana, I want to go fishing. That's what I want to go do. I want to go fishing. And I want to go fishing with my nephew. And we're going to go down there to get in this. We're going to go fishing. So he got home from the service unscathed. God bless him. And thank him for his service. And they went fishing. Oh, they had a great trip planned. They had a big old flat bottom boat that they're going to float down the river in. They were going to go fishing, and that night they're going to camp out. Maybe, hopefully, if the fishing's good, they'll have some fish for dinner. Enjoy each other's company. It'd be a nice, pleasant time. You know, out in the woods again. No longer the sound of gunfire and mortars. So they floated down the river all day fishing. Done pretty good. Didn't see anybody. So they said, we need to build a camp now. So they rowed over to the shore. You heard me right, rowed. They didn't have a motor on that boat. And they rowed over to the shore and tied it up and started setting up camp. And one thing I forgot to mention, they also had their dog with them. So they found a beautiful place to camp there along the river in northern Indiana. And had their dinner, told a couple stories, and went to bed. And that old dog just slept right between them. Then, about 1 o'clock in the morning, they could hear some mischief going on. Some mischief. Sounded like raccoons were getting into their stuff. Oh, we should have tied it up and hung it from a tree where they couldn't get to it. We'll get the dog and chase it away. Send him out, get him to chase those old coons away. So they let the dog out, and he run after what they thought were coons, and they heard a thump. Boom. And here come the dog back. Send him out again. Send him out again. Yeah. Wouldn't go. Had no interest. None at all. Then they could hear whatever it was walking back down toward the river. Here going through the woods. Shoot, 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 shoot. Then once it was down by the river, they could hear their boat. Their boat was getting knocked around along the shore. It's like something was almost picking it up and beating it up against the rocks. He thought, what in the world is that? Then they could hear rocks. These big rocks being thrown into the river. Then they could hear those rocks being thrown up through the woods towards them. And he said, Larry, it sounded like mortar shells when they were going through the jungles of Vietnam, breaking the leaves and all that. That's what it sounded like. And there was no explosion at the end. So then the fog started rolling in. Really getting dark, really getting foggy. Then they could hear it walking around the camp. And they sat outside their tent, their backs up against a tree. And the young man who just got back from war said to his young nephew, he says, "I've never been this scared in my entire life. What is this?" They got only a couple fairly good looks at it. But what they always said, and what I always hear, is they said they couldn't believe how fast it walked and how quick it moved. They knew they were sitting ducks right there. Well, luckily for them, the sun started to come up and it left as soon as that fog started to burn off. They got down and checked out on the boat. The boat was okay. It was an old flat-bottomed steel boat. It was all right. They tore down camp and they got loaded up in that boat. And they floated on down the river to meet the people that were going to be picking them up. And they were going to be there about 3 o'clock. Well, this man and his nephew, they were there by 10 a.m. I asked them, I said, they told me this incredible story. I said, "Would you go there?" He said, "I'll do one thing for you." I said, "Well, okay, what's that?" He said, "I'll draw you a map, but I'm not going there. And no way. I'll never go back there again. I'll never tell anybody this story again. If you don't mind, if you tell anybody, don't use their names, because they'll think we're nuts, think we're crazy." He also remembered that other soldiers in Vietnam talked about these 8 people that lived in those jungles that they would see from time to time. And now I've heard from the mountains of Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq, soldiers telling us stories of what they thought was a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot that lives in those mountains. According to their tales, according to their stories, don't have quite the outgoing and pleasant personality that the ones that have been reported here in the United States. You know, this got so close to me. Right here where we live, right here on this property in Clinton Falls, we were putting up a bear enclosure for 2 of our wildlife lecture animals. And we had a couple good friends, brothers, that were there from Florida, staying with us. And they were helping me and Cheryl with the bear enclosure. Well, I'd taken off one afternoon to go to the store to buy some fresh chicken, fresh meat. When I get back, I said, "Hey, is Larry?" I said, "Yeah." "There's something walked back up through your woods." I said, "I don't know what it was, but it sounded big." So I didn't really put 2 and 2 together. I didn't think about it much. So that night, I went out to feed all the cats. I believe at that time we had 3 or 4 or 5 tigers, a couple mountain lions, African lion. But we had one Siberian tiger that was absolutely massive. He was huge. And every night when you'd feed him, you'd have to move him to the other side of his enclosure and shut the door, because he would act like he had to make a kill every night. I tried to explain to him. I said, "Louis," I said, "you don't have to, just calm down." He wouldn't do that. No, that was tens of thousands of years of instinct, Mother Nature. But that particular night, when earlier in the day those friends talked about seeing or hearing something in our woods, I realized something, because I looked down through Louis' enclosure and I couldn't see him. I thought, my God, is he gotten out? No, he had not escaped. He was standing at the very end like one of those statues you would see of a lion, you know, just in a sitting position. And I looked down at all the other cats that were basically in a straight line. I could see every enclosure, and every cat was in the same position, sitting there like a statue, looking straight back into the woods. Something was in the woods. And if I had gone around our alligator facility and walked into those woods, I might have seen something. But here's the thing. Something told me, don't do it. Don't go in those woods. Our home, where we live now, our compound, several years ago, 3 men went squirrel hunting in a woods that's basically 10 minutes from here. That's if you're driving really, really slow. They'd gone squirrel hunting back in these woods and gotten back there before light. So Dad was on a ridge, his son was on another ridge, and a friend of his son was on the third ridge. And they were listening. The sun was just starting to go up when the little squirrels would come out of their nest. Now, I never could figure out squirrel hunting because I'd always think, go buy a chicken. I mean, because you have to cook squirrel for days before it's even tender enough, not unless you have a secret recipe. So what happened was one of the young men, he said he could hear something coming through the woods, and to him it sounded like the biggest buck he'd ever heard. And maybe this is where he's going to set up a deer stand. So what he did was he looked again across this valley. Then he saw it. It was standing right next to a tree. It was staring right at him. He lifted that rifle, and as soon as he lifted that rifle, this thing took a step toward him. And that threw him off so much that he basically just slipped down and sat there and screamed. And he watched this creature, this animal, run through the forest so fast. And I said, how fast did it run? He says it ran as fast as any deer, except the little trees had just completely run over. The bigger ones that would run around. Well, they couldn't find his friend. After Dad ran over and saw his son in this terrible mental condition where he couldn't even talk, he was so shook up. Couldn't even talk. And they found out his friend had ran home. 3 miles he ran home. He'd seen this all happen. He saw his good friend spot this animal, raise his rifle, and this thing would charge him, then run off through the woods. So they called the conservation officer. He comes, he keeps the two young men apart, doesn't want them to be together so they can perfect their stories if they were lying. And he says, I asked both of them to draw what they had seen. And they did. They weren't artists, but they basically drew the same thing. And they found a 16-inch footprint. 16-inch footprint. You know, the Sasquatch Bigfoot legend is an incredible one. There's been thousands of reports, thousands. And a lot of these people that have had an experience, that have seen something like this, I know if I told them, I said, would you swear under a stack of Bible? Would you take a lie detector test to tell us that you're not lying and tell your story? And these people would do that, but it's never really been offered to them, per se. Living around the world is probably one of the most interesting, one of the most unbelievable animals we have on this planet. Highly intelligent. Has to be. It has to be. To avoid us like it has. A survivor. They can basically walk into the forest, survive under its own powers, its own abilities to live in the wilderness. We're nothing compared to them. You know what I said? I said, if Roger Patterson, if Bob Giblin had one thing in front of their name, when they arrived with that video, that film, if it had been filmed by Dr. Roger Patterson or Dr. Bob Giblin, it'd be over. It would be done. And that night they went to University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, to show their film for the first time for scientists. And after a couple viewings, many of the scientists got up and left. Saying, this, what kind of hoax is this? What are you trying to get us, make us believe? And one man was in that room, Bob Titmus. And when he saw this film, he's thinking to himself, well, it's over. It's been discovered. That is the same thing that I saw off the coast of Alaska in 1941. And that was the same thing I saw climb those rock cliffs in Kitimat, British Columbia. With little effort. It's all done. And he could not believe it. No scientist left that room saying these horrible things. So Bob traveled to Bluff Creek. He found those footprints along that sandbar. He made his own cast along with the ones, of course, that Roger Patterson and Bob Giblin had made. He gathered the evidence. He was also an amazing tracker. And he saw which direction that this thing went. And how it just went up this hill. And there at the top of this hill was these rocks about the size of a golf ball covered with algae. And how you could see where its heels had set in and where its buttocks had set in. And from that position, that spot, that Sasquatch had a complete view of that valley. Bob said, we found 3 different sizes of footprints there. And many people have asked, why did it stay in the open? Why did it stay out like that? I know why. Because there was 2 others in the vicinity that he did not, or she, did not want them to get any attention. So it was trying to pull the wool over Bob and Roger. Bob Giblin and Roger Patterson's eyes. It's trying to pull the wool over them. Get them to follow her. It's without a doubt, as I mentioned earlier, either the greatest hoax that's ever been tried or attempted to be pulled off, or the most amazing creature we have on this planet. I prefer the latter, because all the people that have told me their story, all the people that have had things to say, I don't think they were lying to me. I absolutely do not. And I think living on this planet is something known as Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Some people call them forest people. And someone out there has a film far better than the Patterson Giblin film. But they do not want to release it because the attention it would bring to their vacation home, to their retirement place. They did not want to do that. They did not want to let other people know. I have something to tell you. I didn't mention at the start. Tuesday, I had cancer removed from my kidney. And there was some question whether I'd be able to do this afternoon. And I will tell you, it was a tough week. I'd been through snake bite, and I think the snake bite wasn't nearly as challenging as this was. But I knew one thing. I love Columbus. I love Indiana. And I did not want to let anybody down. And I've had such an unbelievable afternoon here today talking to you about the Sasquatch Bigfoot legend. And I shouldn't really call it a legend because I look to it as just another animal that exists on this planet. Now, I mentioned earlier also that we do wildlife lectures and education. That's the reason we have bears, tigers, baboons, alligators, snakes, and all these other animals from our menagerie. So when I give a lecture like this one, I do it to help support our animal family. And the Bartholomew County Library was so kind to give us a contribution. If I would come here and chat with you today about Bigfoot or Sasquatch. And we appreciate it so much. Mary Claire, you're just the best. Also want to show you a couple things while we have a moment here. I'm an artist. I am an artist. And this is one of the pieces that I've done. Guess I should put it in front of the camera or the microphone. Feel like something watching? And I know there's a couple people out there today that own this and know about this. So if you'd like to own a print from this illustration that I've done, I do have, oh good, I got it right side up. Simply contact me through Larry Battson right here on Facebook or Larry the Animal Guy and Friends. And the latest one we have that I've done, and it's one of the oldest drawings, we just now recently had it made into prints, was one I simply call Sasquatch. And that one, it is pen and ink. If you would like your own copy of it, contact me through Facebook at Larry Battson. I hope everybody has a blessed day. As I said earlier, please check out the Bartholomew County Library. Their website is incredible. But go to the library when this is all done and enjoy their resources that they have and the fine people that work there and made our visit today possible. We love each and every one of you. This is Larry Battson, broadcasting from the remote jungles of Clinton Falls, Indiana. And I'm happy to say, I'm pleased to say, I was glad I was able to do this today for you. God bless you. Thank you all very much. Have a great weekend.